we always talk about don't do this, don't do that, and make sure you do this, make sure you do that. Well, what happens when you fail, when you fall on your face? I had a guy one time, I had mentioned a sin that I committed in the past, and I was using it as an example of what not to do and how dangerous that sin was. And a guy who I have a lot of respect for came to me afterward and was pretty mad that I would mention that in the middle of a sermon and said that I had no business talking about things like that, that it glorified in some way. And I understand some of you may feel that way as well. But what I ended up in a reasonable conversation telling him was, he was worried about some people in his family may get the wrong idea if they hear a preacher talking about past mistakes. I said, well, you better tell them not to read the Bible because it's full, except for one person, is full of people who failed. So what happens when you make a terrible mistake, when you do something, we rank sins, when you do something that's really bad or we feel like it's really bad, what then? I'm Zach. This is The Average Christian, a project simply about having a relationship with God, what that means, how to live that out in practical terms. So we're looking at Peter. I want to tell you the story of the Apostle Peter, who was a disciple of Jesus and one that was close to Jesus, Peter, James, and John specifically. And Peter was a strong individual and a strong defender of Jesus. He was a passionate man. He was one that gave up his livelihood. He gave up his lifestyle. When you read through it in some texts, you see that Peter's out fishing and you think, well, Jesus came by and said, hey, why don't you come with me? And Peter just threw down his rod and reel. No, he was fishing for livelihood. That was his profession. And he walked away from that. There's more context to it, but he walked away from that to show you how dedicated he was to Jesus. So let's set the stage here. He made these heartfelt vows to Jesus as well, like in Matthew 26:33 through 35, Peter answered him, though they all fall away because Jesus said they would, though they all fall away because of you, I will never fall away. Peter said to him, Jesus said to him, truly I tell you, this very night before the rooster crows, you will deny me 3 times. Peter said to him, even if I must die with you, I will not deny you. And all the disciples said the same thing. And I believe, he believed that and was committed to it. And you probably know where the story is going, where the account is going. But he became, as I mentioned in verse 37, that same text in Matthew 26, you see how he's there with James and John as one of the 3 closest to Jesus. And Peter had weaknesses, though. I identify with him. I've said that in other videos. I sometimes will be way too emotional and way too passionate and shoot my mouth off before I think and make commitments before that I'm not able to keep and promises that I can't live up to. And that's Peter at times. He spoke too soon. He was too emotionally driven. He struggled in difficult moments at times. And then he denies Jesus at the 3 times in the worst moment of Jesus' life, or one of the worst moments after he said he wouldn't. A guy made a good point recently that this was not Peter's character. He was a defender of Christ. He was strong. But in that moment, he was shaken. You got to remember, Peter's the one that struck Malchus. That's where we get his name in John. But when they came to arrest Jesus, Peter's the one that pulled the sword, the only one that did, and swiped this guy's ear off. Now that's a guy that's ready to throw down, who's ready to die. He sees them take Jesus, and they are taking him through all these mock trials, and Peter is watching from a distance, and I'm sure that he is shocked. Peter is still under the assumption, as best we can tell, that Jesus is going to set up a literal kingdom on this earth and overcome his oppressors, and that doesn't happen, and it looks like a horrible defeat. And in the midst of all this, they are saying, hey, wait a second, you were with Jesus. And Peter's saying, no, that wasn't me. And he says, oh, no, wait, we know that you were with him. We saw you with him. And he says, look, I don't even know him. And finally, the 3rd time, he curses because he's so committed to lying, vehemently, that he was not. And it was out of reaction, a terrible decision in a moment, makes this terrible mistake, does exactly what Jesus said he was going to do and denies him the 3rd time. And then you see Jesus' reaction in Luke 22, verses 61 through 62. The Lord turned and looked at Peter, and Peter remembered the saying of the Lord, how he had said to him, before the rooster crows today, you will deny me 3 times. And he went out and wept bitterly. That phrase, the Lord turned and looked at Peter in the midst of all this, I can't imagine what went through his mind. I can't imagine how defeated he felt, how bad and just guilty, the guilt that must have overwhelmed Peter to go out and weep like that, remembering his denial of Jesus' claim that he would deny him, that he would turn on him. And now in this moment, when push came to shove, he fails. And Peter seemed to give up. Now, I can't prove this. I'm not sure. This is just, I'm positing this as a possibility. When you go to John 21, verses 1 through 3, it looks like Peter has gone back to his old life. After this, Jesus revealed himself again to the disciples by the Sea of Tiberias, and he revealed himself in this way: Simon Peter, Thomas, Nathanael of Cana in Galilee, the sons of Zebedee, the two others of his disciples were together. Simon Peter said to them, "I'm going fishing." They said to him, "We will go with you." They went out and got into the boat, but that night they caught nothing. It looks like he's just going back. I don't know. Perhaps Peter feels like there's nothing left for him. Jesus is gone. Jesus has been defeated. Let me put it that way. Jesus has been defeated. And at his worst moment, I failed him. So I'm just going to go back to fishing and go back to what I know. And it's probably all over anyhow. So Jesus goes after Peter. When you look later on in John 21, looks for him and finds him. And then he asks him these questions in John 21:15. When they had finished breakfast, Jesus said to Simon Peter, "Simon, son of John, do you love me more than these?" He said to him, "Yes, Lord, you know that I love you." He said to him, "Feed my lambs." He said to him a second time, "Simon, son of John, do you love me?" He said to him, "Yes, Lord, you know that I love you." He said to him, "Tend my sheep." Jesus speaks again the third time, "Simon, son of John, do you love me?" Peter was grieved because he said to him the third time, "Do you love me?" And he said to him, "Lord, you know everything. You know that I love you." Jesus said to him, "Feed my sheep." Jesus still had a use for Peter. There's a lot of reasons why I ask in these three different ways. The point is, Jesus still had a use for Peter. And Peter goes on to fulfill that use and empty himself once again and become what Jesus wanted him to. In the first 11 chapters of Acts are all about this great leader in the church who does continue on being that on-earth shepherd, who's not replaced Jesus, but taken that station as being a shepherd and being a leader for the church. And before Saul converts to Christ and becomes Paul, it's Peter there. And my point is this: when you contrast him with Judas, when Judas found out what he had did, he went out and hanged himself. And that's a horrible reaction to guilt too, but there was no comeback. There was no change. Peter realized Jesus still had a use for him. Jesus still was wanting Peter to know it's not over. There is still plenty for you to do. My point is this: there's always a comeback, no matter how bad you think the sin is, no matter how far you think you've fallen, no matter how much you felt hopeless. Jesus still had a use for Peter. He still has a use for you. You may be with the Lord and this may happen to you, and you might be thinking, "I'll never leave the Lord." Peter said the same thing. I would never do this, that, or the other. It may happen. And one day I hope you remember this lesson. If you're ever found like this, when you do fall, there's always a way to come back, and Jesus always has a use for you. Thank you for being with us. If you're on YouTube and you have not yet subscribed, we know that some of you out there are still watching these videos without pushing that button. Please support us. Help us out. Hit the button below. If you want to see what we released last week, it's up here in this corner. What YouTube recommends is over here. For our podcast listeners, thank you for being with us. Please subscribe, rate, and review. It helps us get the word out, and share this with somebody else if it'll help them.